Okay. Okay. Trying to say that New York has been horrendous this winter, and so it's nice to be in 60-degree, 65-degree weather. But not only that, it's a beautiful environment, and as it happens, there's been a lot the past few days on Colorado on my mind. My nephew, my great nephew, is here studying for a PhD in the sciences. I was able to see him this morning. My publisher, one of my publishers, is here. I had lunch with her, and then
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, okay. I got it.
Get rid of the other one.
And the coat? All right. Now they're tangled up. Don't worry about it. In addition, as I was leaving New York yesterday, our next door neighbor had suitcases right next to her, and she told me that she was going to Denver, as her daughter had just, her daughter was the curator of contemporary art at the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Denver, just had a baby. So Colorado has been surrounding me for the past couple of days. And of course, I'm very grateful that Denver had the first exhibition of Mongolian art in the mid-1990s. So Mongolia has played, or Denver has played a rather important role in Mongolia, bringing Mongolia to the fore. And I've been studying Mongolia and Inner-Asia for decades, I guess. I've always had difficulty really in understanding the nomadic pastoralists of Inner-Asia. Really tough to get their thinking, their values, and so on. It took my son to make me understand why. When he was 6 or 7 in school, they were learning to read and write. They'd have these little assignments, draw the picture and show me, tell me what's in the picture. One of the assignments that the teacher gave was, what does your father like to do? The other kids had, my father likes to play tennis, my father likes to fix cars, my father likes to play golf. My kid said, my father likes to sit. Very difficult for sitters to understand nomads. What I want to talk about is the Mongols and the change in our views of the Mongols over the past couple of decades. In traditional times, in the West, in Russia, in all parts of the world, the Mongols, big conception of them was that they were marauders, plunderers, killers, engaged in massacres and so on, didn't contribute. Particularly in Russia, they were perceived as horrible supporters of feudalism and destroyed a tremendous amount of Russian culture. In the 1980s, those of us involved in Mongol studies, all 2 of us, decided that we ought to think about presenting a somewhat slighter view, a different view of the Mongols, not ignoring the fact that they had done tremendous damage, they had brought tremendous destruction on various parts of Asia and Europe, and had been involved in killing, massacring. But there's another side to the story, and what I want to point out to you today is the positive elements of Mongol rule without necessarily ignoring some of the negative aspects. We started to do that, and then in Mongol studies and Chinese studies, and then popularizers came to the fore. That's a good term for them. It started vulgarizers, is the negative term. So you have people saying, taking our view that was moderate about the Mongols and saying that Genghis Khan was a Democrat, Genghis Khan believed in international law, and so the book came out of Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. Genghis Khan had nothing to do with the making of the modern world. Freud and Einstein maybe, but not Genghis Khan. So we don't want to go too far on this. To start, what did Genghis Khan really do? I think you can see from this map what he, in effect, did. His greatest...
Can you focus that a little better?
I don't think so. I think that's about as far as you can get. Genghis Khan unified the Mongols. Mongolia is about 3.5 times the size of France, with a population today of about 3 million. In those days, population of less than 1 million in the 13th century. So they're scattered all over the place in a huge territory. And his greatest contribution was not warfare. He didn't innovate in any way in terms of military tactics, strategy, or weaponry. All of that existed earlier. His greatest success was bringing the Mongols together and setting up an administrative structure. And the result of it was the creation of the largest contiguous land empire in the world, stretching from Korea in the north to southern Russia, and then in the south from southern China to Baghdad. It didn't last long. The empire broke up very quickly because the Mongols were not used to administering such a large, enormous terrain. And in addition, there was fragmentation. They lacked unity. One of the things that created problems for them was they didn't set up an orderly, regular system of succession to the Khanate, to the guy who was in charge of the whole domain. What they set up, they had a number of ways of succession. One way was the youngest son becoming the great Khan. A system known as ultimogeniture. They ignored that. They went in a different direction. Another technique was the younger brother becoming the next Khan when the great Khan died. What they chose was a system called tanistry, where the Mongol nobles would come together and would choose the most meritorious of the descendants of Genghis Khan. It had to be a descendant. But as we've seen in the United States, different people think different candidates are better than others. Some people think Hillary Clinton. Some people think Sarah Palin. Some people think, I don't know, Romney or whatever. But we've been able to resolve that peacefully. The Mongols couldn't. And the result is that the Mongol Empire broke up into 4 segments. One, East Asia. Second, over here, Central Asia. Third, the Middle East, West Asia, and then Russia and the Golden Horde. So the empire lasted for less than 2 generations. It broke up. That doesn't, and in fact, were at war with each other. The Russians were at war with the people of the Middle East. The people in East Asia were at war with the people in Central Asia. The only peaceful relationship was between those people in China and the people out here in the Middle East. And that would have dramatic implications, as you'll see when I show you more of the slides. It's a typical ger, a tent This is typical of the nomadic pastoral existence. These cares were ideal for people who moved around from place to place to find water and grass for their animals. And it can be put up in 45 minutes, can be dismantled in 45 minutes. So it suited a culture that emphasized movement. You had to move periodically in order to find additional water and grass for your animals. It's no accident that horses are going to play a role in art. The Mongols were enamored of the horse. The horse played a very important role in the expansion of the empire. Unlike the typical conception that we have, Genghis Khan was not a great military conqueror. In his 3 major campaigns, he didn't annex new territory. He didn't incorporate new territory into the Mongol domains. It was the 2nd and 3rd generation of Mongols that conquered Russia, that conquered Persia, and so on. He himself got what he wanted from the people he attacked and then went back to Mongolia. He never really annexed any territory except in Central Asia, where there was tremendous resistance. Muslims in that area resisted Genghis Khan and the Mongols, and massacres on both sides, and the result was that he felt that he needed to occupy that territory. So Central Asia, Samarkand, Bukhara, those areas came under the control of Genghis personally. But other than that, he really didn't conquer any additional territory. When he had finished his Central Asian campaigns in the 1220s, he went back towards Mongolia and died in 1227. We don't know how he died. We don't know from what he died, probably of natural causes. He may have been wounded in a battle, and the cumulative effects of that wound may have led to his death, but it looks to be natural causes. That led me to some difficulties some years ago. A guy from NPR came and met me in a restaurant, taped me about Genghis Khan for about an hour and a half. And I described what I pointed out to you in more detail. And then he said, "Wow, isn't there something colorful about his death? Something unusual?" And I said, "Well, there's a kind of wacko story. He had been given by one of the enemies, turned over his daughter as a means of ingratiating himself to the Khan, the great Khan. And she didn't want to be with Genghis Khan, so she hid a knife in her vagina, and just as they were having sex, she killed him." And I said, "This is a myth and all this." And that was the only thing he played. The whole damn hour and a half. So you got to be careful about these folks. Anyway, he dies, and the empire persists beyond that time, and his successors are the ones that are really going to create a tremendous, have a tremendous impact on the world. Nobody in history or other disciplines really focused on their contributions. It was the art historians who first pointed out the tremendous contributions that the Mongols had made in the diffusion of art and in bringing about a kind of global history in the 13th century. For the first time, you have Europeans actually reaching all the way to China, and that's due to the Mongols. A tremendous exhibition at Cleveland Museum of Art, which is of course one of the great glories of the United States in terms of Asian art, put together in 1968, very early on, an exhibit on Chinese art under the Mongols. And then as a result of that, there were all sorts of exhibitions at the Metropolitan Museum, at Los Angeles, Cleveland, Los Angeles, San Francisco, that showed the tremendous impact that the Mongols had had. And I'll show you this when we get to the next group of slides. But this is one of them. The Mongols patronized this man who turned out to be the greatest Chinese painter of the 13th and 14th centuries, a man named Zhang Longfu, who painted this. He was given a no-show job by one of the Mongol Khans and was allowed to paint. But of course, he knew who his patrons were, and his patrons loved horses. So he portrayed this horse, but he did so in a very unique kind of way, in a symbolic way. When he shows horses that are like this, that are sturdy, strong, he is implying a criticism of officials, because the way they became strong and sturdy, they symbolize the officials, is through corruption and graft. When you see, as I'll show you later on, horses that are just about on their last breath, he is praising officials who don't take advantage of the population in their life. Portrait of Genghis Khan by the Persians. And here he is at the very top. Probably didn't work out that way, but he didn't have that kind of throne, but nonetheless, the Persians, by the 16th century, this is a 16th century illustrated manuscript, portrayed him getting tribute from envoys. And again, the illustrators knew that horses were quite critical and quite important for the Mongols. It's his grandson who really created the kind of image of the Mongols that was going to survive them in the world and promoted global history. Grandson Kublai Khan. In this painting, which was done for life, we don't have an image of Genghis Khan. We don't have any painting of Genghis in contemporary manner, but we have paintings of Kublai, his grandson. And he'd just taken power as emperor of China and the Great Khan. Very simple, wearing a very simple robe, typical, looks like an ordinary figure. You'll see what happens a little bit later. This is his wife, who played a very important role. Mongol women were extraordinarily important and had more rights than women almost anywhere in the world at that time. They had the right to own property, which meant owning animals. They had the right of divorce, which was quite unique during that time period. And she had a tremendous influence on her husband in ruling China and in ruling the Mongol domains. She has been in China for quite a while, and so she's very elaborate jewelry, robe, and a kind of unique headgear, which Mongol women of the 13th and 14th centuries were to imitate. Possibly probably apocryphal story was that the women played a very important role in Mongolian battle against the Chinese, and the men wanted to reward them in some way, and they looked at the women, saw no headgear on them, so they decided to devise a hat for them as a reward. But they wanted them to recognize that they were always going to be under the heels of men, and so it's an upside-down hoop. Whether that's true, whether the kind of apocryphals are, who knows. We get to Kublai, 1281, 21 years of ruling in China, and he's obviously enjoyed Chinese food. It's quite grotesque by this stage. It's afflicted with gout. He is wearing a very elaborate ermine coat, not the simple little white robe that he had in the past. And this is again from life. It was done by Chinese painter of that time period. It was very helpful for the Mongols to have themselves portrayed in different cultures as supporting different religions and different ethnic groups. And so Kublai, starting with Genghis Khan, there was the toleration of foreign religions, and that helped them really rule the empire. Under Kublai, it became a general policy. And so he provided help to Tibetan Buddhist monasteries. He provided assistance to Muslim mosques and theological colleges. Provided help to Nestorian Christians, because his mother, one of the most fabulous women in world history, really, was a Nestorian Christian. So here he is in a Persian manuscript. And as you can see, he's becoming more and more Caucasoid. He's surrounded by the great tile work of the Islamic world, lamps, geometric patterns, which is typical of Islamic art. Now, this is an illustration for Marco Polo. And now Kublai has become totally a medieval sage king, breeding the two Polo brothers, Polo father and Polo uncle. Polo tells us, in relation to Kublai's weight, that there was no single horse that could sustain his weight. So he had to be carried around by elephants when he went out on the hunt. And I wish I had the image of him on an elephant, but I don't. Sorry, but anyway. Okay. What the Mongols did, I think, which was most important, was bringing the world together, particularly China and the Middle East. And this is best shown in the art. You would think that this is a work produced in China, a celadon, with 3 fish, the fish representing prosperity. It's actually work produced in Persia. And if you go to the Metropolitan has the original Chinese version and this copy by the Persians. And you can tell immediately that the Chinese version is superior in quality. But you don't find any earlier, in terms of art, you don't find any symbolism to fish or any depiction of fish in Persian art. This is a development that's based on Mongols. The phoenix, quintessential kind of Chinese motif, but this is a work done in Persia. It's a phoenix. Never before in Iran had there been an image of the phoenix, represented in China, the empress, and here it is in Persian art. Again, phoenix and tile work. We're very lucky to have this because it comes from a summer palace that the Mongols built in Iran, called the Takht-i-Suleiman, the throne of Solomon, which was in disrepair by the 1950s. But German archaeologists went to Iran and excavated the site and came up with these spectacular tiles and pottery as well. Again, the phoenix. The dragon. Again, quintessential Chinese motif. But this is tile work from Iran, from that summer palace. The Mongols had a tremendous impact on transmitting motifs, art motifs from China to the West. an illustration for probably one of the greatest Renaissance men of all time, a Persian named Rashid ad-Din. Anybody heard of him?
Yes.
Okay. Figured as much. The Rashid ad-Din, one of the greatest figures in world history, to my mind. Jewish, but converted to Islam, and was trained as a doctor, but was recognized as quite an extraordinary figure by the Mongols, and eventually became the prime minister of Iran. Introduced all sorts of things to the Persians, from China, Europe, and all sorts of other diffusion. But he was given at one point the task of writing a history of the Mongols, because the people in Iran, the Mongols in Iran, were losing contact with their heritage, in their Mongol heritage. So he starts writing the work on the history of the Mongols, but recognizes that you have to have a history of Iran, then you have to have a history of Islam, history of Islam's relation to China, India, Europe. In fact, he wrote the first universal history, the first global history ever done, and made sure that it was beautiful. He allowed or commissioned illustrators to provide illustrations in his book. And this is an illustration, the geography part of the book, of a Chinese house, Chinese dress, Nepalese on the right-hand side. But it comes directly from Chinese art. The mountains come directly from Song Dynasty and Yuan Dynasty landscapes. There were no Chinese who reached Persia. It was the Mongols. The Mongols brought this stuff, these designs. So we don't think of the Mongols as appreciating beauty, but we can see in this context that they did. Extraordinary textile, a mandala, a kind of unique textile that we can actually date. It's 1329. These two men were fighting it out. One of the things that happens is, as I pointed out, there was no regular orderly system of succession. So whenever a Khan died in China, sometimes there'd be a civil war, sometimes there'd be assassinations. These two brothers came to an agreement that the younger brother would become the Khan. Their two wives, remember the half. And it's every conceivable culture represented. Down here, all sorts of Hindu gods. Up at the very top, Tibetan lamas, a Buddhist figure in the center, a Persian-style bead circle. So you have the Mongols creating a system where there's tremendous artistic diffusion. This particular textile, which is, I'd say, about, in terms of height, bottom of the floor here, up to at least the top up there, and width probably about half of the blackboard. Is at the Metropolitan Museum. The Metropolitan was faced with a dilemma, the Metropolitan and Cleveland Museum of Art, in the 1980s, because a lot of these textiles, which were beautifully preserved, were smuggled out of Tibet. A lot of these were gifts to Tibetan lamas. Tibetan Buddhism became very important during the Mongol era, and a lot of gifts were given to Tibetans. So about 60 or 70 of these textiles came out. The Cleveland and the Met had really ethical discussions about whether they should build for these things. They finally did, because they felt otherwise they'd go into private collections and nobody could see them. They bought 60 of these, and then this came out in the late 1980s. The dealer who got this recognized that this was an extraordinary textile with every conceivable culture being represented. And he recognized that he could make more money by cutting it in four. So you can't tell here, but he cut it right down the middle in both directions. He sold 2 pieces to a Tokyo dealer and 2 to a dealer in Geneva. Fortuitously, James Watt, the curator at the Metropolitan, happened to be within the same month in Geneva and Tokyo. And one of those things that make you believe that there is a divine presence, recognize it's the same thing. And they bought, obviously, they bought this. But the dealer had the last laugh. They estimated it would have cost about $1.6 million to get the whole piece. It cost them $6.5 million to get the 4 individual pieces. But it does represent a tremendous indication of the diffusion that was brought about by the Mongols. A tremendous global history that was global art that was brought about by the Mongols. And I think here you can see there's a depiction of the 2 emperors of that time period. Eventually, the young guy died and was succeeded by his older brother as Emperor of China and Great Khan. So it worked out very nicely. I want to show you this. Can we switch to the next one? In addition to kind of artistic diffusion, there is tremendous scientific diffusion that was promoted by the Mongols. The Mongols were interested in whatever was practical. They weren't going to support Confucian philosophy or Confucian essays or anything like that. They weren't going to be interested in poetry. They weren't going to be interested in Persian poetry, Chinese poetry. They were interested in practical things. And so you have the most dramatic scientific and medical diffusion up until that time. The Mongols and China recognized that the Persians and the Middle East had made quantum leaps forward in astronomy and medicine. And they therefore recruited Persians to come to China. Persian astronomers first to build astronomical instruments, to build an observatory. Those who've been to Beijing, you've seen a mock-up of the observatory that was built by the Mongols in Beijing. The Persians also helped the Chinese develop a more accurate calendar. And then they invited doctors, because the lifestyle of the Mongols was demanding. They had lots of ailments. As I said, Kublai had gout. They had all sorts of problems. So they were constantly recruiting Persian doctors, including Korean doctors, medicinal drugs that supposedly could help them. And they even had translated 36 volumes of Persian medical texts into Chinese. This is something you wouldn't ordinarily think of the Mongols doing. A friend of mine taught at Berkeley, probably you folks knew him, believed that the Mongol Empire collapsed because of what he calls dietary decadence. They had real problems they needed doctors. He says that in Mongolia, you could only get liquor, the fermented mare's milk, in the late summer or early fall. So you could only get plaster during that time. When they took over China and Persia get drunk all the time. You find reports of tremendous orgies of food and drink in all of the travelers who reached the Mongols, Marco Polo, all sorts of others. And what he did, which was very clever, was to look at the lifespan. You can't obviously do significant research on individuals, but you look at the lifespan of the Khans, and you find that the original Khans, Genghis Khan lived into his late 60s. Kublai Khan lived till he was 79. Then you go further, and you get them in Persia, the Ilkhans dying in their 40s. One after another. Not because of assassination, but because of grotesque eating and drinking. And so the Mongols really needed doctors. The other thing that the Mongols, I'm going to show you a whole bunch of what I think are spectacular images that the Mongols were responsible for. The Mongols were not crazy about porcelain. It wasn't one of their big things. They were interested in gold objects. And yet they would have a dramatic impact on porcelain. They recognized that there was a tremendous market in the Middle East for Chinese porcelains. And so they got involved in with Chinese potters. They were able to bring from the Middle East the cobalt blue that's used in blue and white. We often associate blue and white with the Ming Dynasty, but actually the first blue and whites derived from the Mongol era. They also recognized that the austere, kind of beautiful ceramics that were produced by the Chinese in earlier dynasties, particularly the Song Dynasty, were not going to be saleable in the Middle East. And so they begin encouraging, if not commanding, the potters to produce these decorative motifs. Plants, animals, over here, a mythical animal, grapes, all sorts of things. And they succeed. Tremendous number of porcelains wind up in the Middle East, and eventually in the next dynasty, colossal amounts of blue and white reach Turkey, reach Iran in the 15th and 16th century. This is a work done by the official horse painter of the dynasty, a man named Ren Fa. And again, you see, very sturdy animal. The horse looks great. He's indirectly criticizing officials. Same thing here. He's indirectly criticizing this official. Zhao Rongfu, great painter, top there, also producing spectacular horses and looking great, and so on. But then you get this, again by the horse painter, Ren Fa. A nag who's practically on his last legs represents the honest officials in China during that time period, in order to emphasize that. We know from the inscriptions that that was what he was getting at. The Chinese painters were actually many of them were totally subsidized by the Mongols. Zhao Rongfu was given a kind of no-show job by Kublai Khan. His wife, the first female painter whose work has survived into modern times, also benefited from patronage by the Mongols. The Mongols, if you could find something that would appeal to them in terms of the arts or science, really adored beautiful objects. I won't show you, I'm running out of time here, so let me just show you a couple of mandalas. The Mongols were fascinated by Tibetan Buddhism because it was simple and it wasn't tremendously intellectual, didn't require study of texts, so Tibetan Buddhism was favored by the Mongols. Another great textile in the Cleveland Museum collection of a figure destroying the demons, wiping out the demons here. Tells you something about the range of the Mongols. This is produced in China. And what the Mongols wanted was it could be sold in the Middle East as well. So they had the weavers produce what they thought was Arabic script on the right-hand side. It's not. It's corrupted and not really Arabic script. But the Mongols thought it was, and they thought that with the Arabic script it would be more saleable in the Middle East. The other great project that the Mongols initiated was an attempt to devise a universal written language. They had a Tibetan Buddhist who was in favor of the court, developed a written language that could be used for Mongolian, Persian, lots of other languages. And it actually, phonologically, is quite remarkable. You can see this written language over here. It's a combination of Tibetan and Sanskrit. What the Mongols didn't realize, and Kublai Khan in particular didn't realize, it's difficult to enforce something from on top. Written language is developed from the people. And so it never took hold. It's used on paper money that the Mongols produced. It's used on porcelains, on lacquerware, on passports, beautiful passports actually, in silver and gold, where they'd say, the Khan, if you do anything to harm this traveler, the Khan will unload his power on you and destroy you, and so on and so on, all sorts of implications. There's one of these passports has just recently come to the Metropolitan. It's a beautiful, beautiful work with a Oxford inscription on it. This new work. It didn't work. If you find a porcelain with this inscription, it's probably the most valuable porcelain that you can find anywhere. Buy it. Okay, let me stop here and be glad to answer questions or comments.